The life of Princess Beatrice of the United Kingdom. Beatrice was the youngest child of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. As is often the case with the last-born child, she was treated as the baby of the family. Beatrice was born on the 14th of April 1857 in Buckingham Palace. Her parents spoiled her, and her mother, who was notorious for finding babies ugly, found Beatrice to be beautiful. With an age gap of 4 years between her and her next sibling Leopold, and an age gap of 16 years between her and her eldest sibling Vicky, Beatrice was not very close to her older siblings, and as her siblings married, her home became lonelier. When Beatrice was only 4 years old, her father died, and her mother became dependent on Beatrice for emotional support, something a young child should never have to do. Queen Victoria would often take Beatrice from her bed and wrap her in her father's nightclothes and have Beatrice sleep beside her. After 1871, with all her sisters married, Victoria relied heavily on Beatrice for support. She became her mother's secretary, and during a period of illness in 1871, Beatrice wrote diary entries for her mother as her mother dictated out loud. Although the Queen was against her youngest daughter marrying, a number of suitors came forward. Napoleon Eugene, the French Prince Imperial and heir of Emperor Napoleon III of France, grew close to Beatrice, and rumours began to circulate of a possible engagement between the two. These rumours ended with Napoleon's death in 1879. Beatrice was devastated at the loss and received much support from her mother. Louis IV, Grand Duke of Hesse, was also suggested as the possible husband for Beatrice. He was the widower of Beatrice's sister Alice, who had died in 1878. However, this was forbidden by law, and so it never happened. Other candidates, such as Prince Alexander and Prince Louis of Battenberg, were rejected. Prince Louis of Battenberg married Beatrice's niece, Princess Victoria of Hesse and by Rhine. During the wedding, Beatrice met Prince Henry, the brother of Louis, and they fell in love. Upon returning to Britain, Beatrice expressed her desire to marry Henry. She was met with silence from her mother, and the two did not talk for 7 months, only communicating by note. Only after being persuaded by Beatrice's sister-in-law, the Princess of Wales, and her sister, the Crown Princess of Prussia, did Victoria begin to talk to her daughter again. Victoria consented to the marriage only on the condition that Beatrice and Henry remain in Britain close to the Queen. Beatrice and Henry married each other on the 23rd of July 1885 in St. Mildred's Church in Osborne. After a short honeymoon, Beatrice and Henry returned to the Queen. The longer they were married, the stronger Beatrice's love for Henry grew. The English court grew brighter and happier after the wedding of Princess Beatrice and gave Victoria a new lease of life. Henry was determined to take part in the military, which annoyed the Queen. She was opposed to his participation in the army. Henry felt oppressed by his mother-in-law, especially when she sent a warship to bring him back to England after he went to Corsica with his brother Louis. Beatrice continued to work as her mother's secretary. The Queen criticised Beatrice when, a week before she gave birth to her first child, she chose to eat in her rooms rather than with the Queen. Beatrice used chloroform during her deliveries and gave birth to 4 children: Alexander, Ina, Leopold and Maurice. Henry was bored by the lack of activity at court and longed for employment. In response, the Queen gave him the position of Governor of the Isle of Wight, but this was not enough. He pleaded to be allowed to join the Ashanti expedition fighting in the Anglo-Ashanti War, and eventually the Queen allowed him to. Only a month later, in January 1896, Henry died of malaria. Despite her grief, Beatrice remained her mother's companion, and Victoria tried to comfort her daughter. The Queen knew her daughter needed a place of her own, and she gave the Kensington Palace apartments, once occupied by the Queen and the Duchess of Kent, to her daughter. Beatrice's life was forever changed when her mother died in 1901. Her position at court was diminished. She was not close to her brother Bertie, who was now Edward VII, and they often got into arguments. One such argument was when Bertie attempted to sell Osborne House. Queen Victoria had left Beatrice and Louise houses on the estate, and the selling of Osborne House would threaten their privacy. Bertie extended the land around their homes to compensate for their loss of privacy, and went on to give the house to the nation. From 1896 to 1944, Beatrice was the governor of the Isle of Wight. From 1901 until 1931, Beatrice edited her mother's diaries, something that greatly distressed George V and Queen Mary. Her editing was done to protect those living, but also removed important information that would have been valuable from a historical standpoint to truly understand Queen Victoria's point of view in events. Beatrice continued to appear in public after her mother's death, but most of her engagements were related to her mother. Beatrice continued to live on the Isle of Wight in Osborne Cottage until Carisbrooke Castle, the home of the governor of Isle of Wight, became vacant. She sold Osborne Cottage and moved into the castle. She also continued to live in Kensington Palace as well. In 1914, Beatrice's favourite son Maurice died fighting in the First World War. Another son, Leopold, died in 1922 from a knee operation, having inherited haemophilia and hemorrhage during the surgery. Beatrice eventually withdrew from public life and lived her last days in Brantbridge Park in Sussex. She passed away on the 26th of October 1944, the last child of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert to die.